on your end. Oh, there we
It
go.
worked. I can do it. I didn't know I could do that.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's dive right in, I guess. Oh, I need to share my screen, so please enable that. Yeah, I mean, we can do it either way. So you can share your screen and play around with the app, or maybe it's easier for me to run a few examples on my end as well. So we'll start with that. Yeah.
I think it's enabled for you to share now.
Oh, it is. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that works. All right, here we go. Yeah, so you've created accounts on our website. So, I think you've already kind of played around with it a little bit. And feel free to jump in with questions at any time as well. High level overview is just like you write the claims, and then it generates an initial draft for you. Specifically, it generates claim support language. So one of the kind of formal requirements of a patent application is that whatever it is that you're claiming needs to be supported in the specification. And so I guess to use kind of an analogy, like claims are sort of like your fences, right? Like you're claiming territory. You're building a fence around the intellectual landscape to protect what is yours. And the patent office requirement is that in order for you to build any fences at all, you need to have some real estate to build the fence on. So I tend to analogize the specification as kind of like the land underneath your fences, right? Like this is the subject matter that you're sharing with society. And if you're going to claim any intellectual property, you need to first share that underlying subject matter with other people. And so you cannot under section 112, you cannot claim anything that you haven't disclosed in the spec. In practice, what that ends up being tends to be just like kind of a formal requirement. So in order to make sure we don't get a section 112 rejection when we're prosecuting a patent application, we make sure that whatever it is we write in the claim is at least literally like recited in the specification. And so as part of that, we end up having to write a lot of mechanical language that just makes sure that we have claim support. And so we would basically copy over the claims and work with the claims to rewrite the claims in kind of non-limiting prose format. So in the brief summary, it looks like prose, like full sentences and paragraphs. In the detailed description, we have like these kind of fairly conceptual, generic, abstract diagrams, and we discuss those diagrams as well. And so the summary basically recites each individual claim element one at a time, and then the figures and the detailed description together recites this particular arrangement of claim elements that the claims are describing, to make sure that both the individual elements and the arrangement of elements have at least literal narrow support in the specification. Does that make sense so far?
Yes. So this is just one of the example ones that are on your website. Typically, when we are doing something, we need to write up the claims ourselves, and then what it does is it automates it into the figures and specification in just that sort of a generic box structure you have there.
Yeah, exactly. So the input is the claims, and then the outputs are the figures and spec. And so we recommend that you do your claim drafting in the app. And then if you hit Command Enter on the Mac or Control Enter, you'll generate a new spec. So you can write your claims one element at a time and see what it renders, right? So like I'm saying, a computer comprising a processor, a memory device, wherein the device includes a module. We do a good job where, we recognize the device refers to the memory device. I didn't put in semicolons and it still works. So it's fairly robust to natural language inputs. And then if you give it like, say a first memory device and then a second memory device, by default, it'll recognize this refers to the most recent concept, but of course we recommend proper antecedent basis. So If you give it the global match, it will identify that reference as well as the first memory device. So it knows to put the module inside the first memory device. And the same thing with the detailed description, it'll say the first memory device may include a module. So yeah, to answer your question, that's basically how you would use this app. You put in the claims, you get your draft. It's really kind of that simple. But of course, there is, it's easy to learn, but hard to master. So like, there are nuances about how you should write your claims so that even a software can understand it without ambiguity. So law students tell us that this is a really great tool to teach them good practices about claim drafting. And also, as they get better and better at claim drafting, they can then leverage this tool as an automation tool to get you about 4 to 6 hours of mechanical writing that is now done with a click of a button on every patent application, so that it frees up your time to really think about the parts of the patent that matter, like writing good claims, writing good key embodiment descriptions, writing alternate embodiment descriptions, so that you don't have to worry about mechanical writing like claim support.
More of a technical question at this point, because I'm curious. I taught computer science for 6 years. What programming language do you use to automate all this?
Yeah, so the
This is cool.
Is done in Python. Yeah. Front end is, we use Vue.js for the user interface, but the back end is written in Python. Yeah.
Cool. Feel free to go ahead with what you were doing before I interrupted with the question.
Oh yeah, no, feel free to jump in. So yeah, like you can download it back into Word and Visio and PowerPoint for the figures. So if you don't have Visio, you can just use PowerPoint. But the specification will be in Microsoft Word. You can open this up and then you can just keep editing as you do. And it's already kind of nicely formatted with paragraph numberings and all that. So that's kind of the flow. Like you write your claims in here, you download it into Word to keep working on it. There's like various other features to watch out for as well. I think trying to think I'll run through a few more examples. So if you give it a method claim, it's going to generate a flowchart. So we think about the universe of all claims as either being a method, which is like a process, right? Like sequence of steps or sequence of events, right? That's one dimension of all claims. And then the second one is a thing that exists, right? So it could be a computer system, it could be a chair, it could be a medical device, it could be a protein, a composition of matter, whatever thing, entity that exists, we consider that to be some kind of a system, at a very high level. So if it's a method claim, we generate a flow chart, and that basically gives you a series of steps. And then if it's anything that's not a method, it'll create a block diagram. So of course, we do recommend that you read through the specification and make sure it is, saying what you want it to say. It gives you a pretty good initial start and a good outline. And then you can further expand on it. One thing to know about what this software doesn't do is to ensure enablement. So enablement just means that whatever it is you're trying to claim in your patent, you need to make sure there's enough context that someone else who is also a technologist in this field can read your specification and reproduce the technology, right? So, so if we think about the patent as like layers of the onion, the claims is the core intellectual property, right? That's the fence that you built to say, like, I'm claiming this part of the intellectual landscape. The next layer around the claims is the claim support language, right? It's narrowly written to basically recite the claims, both the individual elements and the arrangement of the elements, to say, like, these claims are now supported, right? So it's the next layer of the onion. And then you have like the additional contextual language outside of just pure claim support that gives the enablement. So if you read the context, then you have enough context to know how I can reproduce the invention if I go into my garage and try to build it, right? So that's the requirement from the US Patent Office. So as part of getting intellectual property that you now have a monopoly on, in exchange for that, you need to provide enough context to society to tell them how they would otherwise build your technology. So that's what the tool doesn't do, right? The tool generates language for claim support, but it doesn't generate the additional language for enablement. And that's for you, the drafter, to generate the claim support with one click, proofread it, review it, and then further expand on it to make sure there's enough enabling context.
All right, so I'm looking here at the claims you have on the left, and a method for capturing, determining positions, receiving the motion based on the sensor. So these I'm just wondering, are there certain key terms that are used to help it to identify that this is another step or another piece of the machine, or whatever? Is there certain key terms we need to use, or is it the formatting that helps determine whether or not it's a separate piece of the claim to create that figure specification?
Yeah, great question. So it's a combination of many things. It is looking at segmentation. Segmentation is important. So it is looking at the claim one segment at a time to figure out, like, is that another step? Is that another step, right? Our flowchart tool is relatively straightforward at the moment. It's just looking for a sequence of steps to generate the flowchart. And then the block diagram is a little more complex because it's also looking at a lot more of the relationship, the containment relationships between higher level concepts and then lower level concept and then sub concepts beneath that. So it's more like a tree structure to get a block diagram. To provide a bit more context on how this technology works, is very grammatically driven, very syntax driven. So what the software does when it's analyzing your claims is it needs to figure out what all of these words are. It needs to figure out, it uses a machine learning model to figure out, what's a noun, what's an adjective, what's an article, what's a determiner, what's a preposition, and then it builds a map of the grammatical units. And then it goes from grammar to then a knowledge graph, right? So what are the concepts? Which words make up a concept, which words make up a relationship. And then once it builds a knowledge graph, then it becomes really powerful because it basically knows very discreetly down to individual Lego blocks, individual units, like what your invention is. And then it can use that knowledge graph to reconstruct flow charts, block diagrams, specification writing that are very mechanical. So what it doesn't know is, like, for example, it doesn't know what a semiconductor device is at the moment, right? It doesn't know, what a computer is, right? It just knows that that's a concept and that based on your description, it has some relationship to the other concepts in your claim.
Okay, and then this is, again, probably more curiosity. I don't know that the project we're going to be doing for the competition is this complicated, or that I don't think it's even a method. But can methods have split flowcharts that then recombine, or can they start from multiple branches combining to one, or start from a single splitting into multiples?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you say like a method comprising, let's see, receiving data, analyzing data. Right now the flowchart is pretty simple. So you have a dependent claim that says like the method of claim one, further comprising, performing, let's say, I'm just going to make it generic, a third action, performing a fourth action, right? So it's going to, so by default, what it does is that it creates a figure for just an independent claim, because that it considers that to be the most basic embodiment. It then creates additional figures for chains of dependent claims if they introduce at least two or more elements. So it created here, there's two more actions. So it feels that it will always recite everything in the detailed description, but because there's two more elements, it'll create another flowchart. In terms of branching, right, that's what you're asking, like if then, right, like, maybe there are conditions, maybe there are, some dependent claim may have additional steps that need to be inserted. Right now, the flowchart tool is not that sophisticated. It will still recite what you say in the claim in the detailed description in full non-limiting prose. But the flowchart would just be a series of steps, and then it's up to you to download it and rework it, and then add in those condition blocks and rearrange the order as you see fit, all in the either Visio or PowerPoint.
Awesome. And then follow up on machines and objects, physical objects, I guess. I don't know if that's necessarily the right way of putting it.
Yep,
so
systems
not a
and
method.
but
Systems, yeah, that works.
Yeah.
How complicated can some of those boxes get? I mean, how many layers can those things sort of develop in a system?
Yeah, so let's say we have a machine comprising, a widget, let's say a first widget, a second widget, comprising a module, first module, a second module comprising, a first submodule, right? Something like that, right? So you can add in quite a bit of nesting to it, and then it will understand that structure. One thing to pay attention to, like one of the questions I had was like, is a claim an English sentence? A claim is not an English sentence. That's just empirically true. A claim rather is a tree, is an outline. So something like tabs do matter. So let's say I have something comprising a first submodule and then a banana. Whether I have a tab character here or not matters, right? Like that's meaningfully different, right? If I have an indentation there, then the banana is now inside the second submodule. If it's here, then it's inside the second widget. If it's here, it's inside, the machine, right? So whether or not you have proper indentations do make a meaningful difference. So the semicolons themselves are not sufficient to be unambiguously clear about what the structure is. So yeah,
perfect. That was my next question: was do the indents matter?
Yeah, one thing to watch out for is if you have ruler indentations in Microsoft Word and you try to import it into the app, ruler indentations are not text. And so the text doesn't get imported. And so everything collapses into like flat list sometimes. So make sure like either there's actual tab characters inside the Word document or manually add those tab characters back in once it's imported. Yeah.
All right, so I see we have and. Does it do any other things like or? Any other sort of, I guess, I don't know, conjunct. I don't know. Not good with the English word there.
Like a Marcouche group, like a disjunctive sequence. Yeah, so it doesn't do those very well right now. We don't directly support Marcouche groups at the moment. We don't support disjunctive sequences at the moment. So that's something just to watch out for. Like, for example, here it says like, the second module may include the first module, a banana and an apple. So you may wanna change that when you do post editing and just make sure it says like or an apple, right? If you want to make it disjunctive.
And then looking at that specification, does it use the term may as a is that kind of the default, or does it ever have a shall? Does that matter?
So may is kind of like, I would say like 80% of practitioners are in the may school of thinking. And then the minority are in something like can, or I haven't really seen that many examples of shall. But you can create different profiles. Right now, this only applies to the brief summary. In the future, we're going to add it for the detailed description too, but you can change the phrasing we use to say, if you prefer like implementations or aspects, can, additionally or alternatively include, right? And then this all gets updated in real time. And, in the future, if you generate it again, it will still use the same profile unless you switch back to say like the default. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. No, that's actually great. So I mean, using that same editing technique, you could use an or if that were ever necessary. I don't know that it is, but I'm just asking questions. So you've actually answered everything I can think of. Cole, do you have anything?
I was gonna say that Jack, you've been kind of hammering home every question I've thought of before I could even get it out. So, and then Charles either asked it or thought of it too. So,
Nice. I'll run through another example here and just to show like another feature we have. So let's say we have like your standard home desktop system, right? A computer system comprising a computer, a monitor, a keyboard, and a mouse, right? So that's going to get you like a very basic block diagram, and that's enough for providing 112 written disclosure support, certainly. But sometimes you want to work with an illustration that the inventor gave you, for example, or you may draw your own illustrations. So you can just replace the background image with an illustration like this, and then use the same reference numbers to label the image. So 100 being the computer system, it's recited here as well. 110 is the computer. This is 420 is the monitor. This is the keyboard, and then you can change the call out direction. So that's the keyboard, and then this is the mouse, right? And that took me a couple seconds, and that all corresponds to the language we generate. So that would be how you work with illustrations. If you have other figures and you want this to be, say, figure, say, 8, right? You can just change to figure 8. And then all of the numberings update to like 800, 820, 830, right? Looks like there's a little bug there, but you can just change that. So that's another thing to watch out for if you want to work with illustrations instead.
so Jack, when you did that, you
really
just
cool.
right-clicked on the screen to.
Yeah, right-click to upload the image. Command enter to generate a new draft. That's the keyboard shortcut there. Click on this to edit that. We don't currently have editing for individual elements, so you'll have to do that in post-processing. I believe PatentBots has a tool for doing that, more efficiently, but that's not too hard of a fix. In the future, we'll introduce that. Yeah.
Nice.
Now, I'm curious, just the fact you can import an image made me think, is it possible when creating one of these charts that the figures that are naturally created in PatentPal? So you have a computer system comprising a computer, a monitor, a keyboard, and a mouse. Is it possible to say a computer connected to a monitor, keyboard, and mouse? Not that they're inside of it, but that they're connected. Yes. And then that would show up in the figure.
So that's a great point. So I'm going to create a new example. So I say claim 5, a computer comprising, so let's say a system comprising, a processor connected to a memory. And I actually wrote a post on LinkedIn just yesterday on this. So if you write it like this, it's not going to generate a block for the memory. Because you haven't explicitly said that the memory is comprised inside the system. So the broader interpretation is that it may be in the system or it may not be. This is still recited in the same way in the detailed description, right? It says in some embodiments, the system may include a processor. Did Cole get disconnected? I think Brady got disconnected there.
Oh, I've got this recording, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Must have been his internet all along. Oh, there he is.
Goes back. Yeah, so it still reset. The system may include a processor connected to memory, so it provides that claim support regardless. But it's not going to render it in the figure because it doesn't know that the memory is inside the system. So if you replace this with, say, like an external server, right? Based on our knowledge of the world, we wouldn't typically think the server is inside a local computer, for example, right? So this is the correct interpretation, is the broader interpretation. It's not going to try to commit to an assumption about where the external server is located. So if you wanted to render that in the figure, you'll have to write it more explicitly. So a memory connected to the processor. By segmenting it like this, it would know that the computer comprises the memory, right? So yeah, so it's about making it explicit. The machine at the end of the day is very syntax driven. It's not semantically driven and doesn't know what you mean with respect to your common knowledge of the world.
Okay, so this right here, the one that you got shown on the screen there, shows that the processor and memory are both inside of the computer.
Yeah.
And while the claim says that they're connected and the specification says they're connected, does the system ever draw a line between the two in the figure, or is that something we want to do post-processing on the download?
Yeah,
is that something that's even necessary in patent drafting? Honestly, I don't know.
It's preferable in patent drafting. You should draw a line if you want, right? I mean, the figures are, meant to be visual aids, right? Like they're meant to help the reader kind of get a sense for what this is about. At the end of the day, it's still your specification that needs to be a bit more specific than a figure. And there's always going to be a limitation on just how many lines you can draw, especially in a block diagram, if there's too many elements. But yeah, currently you would download this and then you would draw the line manually. In the future, we'll be able to generate some of those lines as well.
Awesome. I can't think of any other questions right now. Cole, you got anything?
Yeah, that's great. I was looking at the custom entry, I can't remember where it's at, and that the top left, that little tab up there. Yeah. So can you just insert those wherever kind of for the specification or?
Right now, there's no kind of drag and drop, arrangement at the moment. It's more just we put in those phrases to make the sentences non-limiting, and then you can customize the wording and the phrase choices we use. And then you can create different profiles. One thing to watch out for is make sure you uncheck, because by default, this is checked. You want to uncheck it. Otherwise, it's going to show ... when something overflows, and you don't want that. And then verbose steps. So verbose step is interesting. So I'll show what that does. So if you have a flow chart like this, so this is an example of a verbose flow chart. That's what we call it, which means it just basically tries to capture the whole segment in there. If you uncheck that, it's gonna try to semantically tries to elegantly capture just a snippet of it to make it a bit more illustrative, and so some people prefer this style, but I find that most people want it to be more verbose. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. I recommend, especially the other members of your team too, as people start playing around with this, that we have a follow-up training for another 30 minutes, a bit further down the road when people have kind of played around with the tool more. I think that will be interesting, because then you've tried it. You're going to have examples in your mind that you want to go over and ask. Certainly you're welcome to just email me as well, and I'll provide support in that way too. But it'll be interesting to kind of as a group walk through some of these examples together that otherwise might either trip up the tool or be kind of confusing for the user.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it. Probably it'll be a month or so, because they don't even come out with the competition challenge until November. But we'll be playing around with it a little bit, and I'm sure we'll have some fun. But that will help us to get some questions for you that might be more specific to an issue we run into or whatever. So
nice. Yeah, and if you can send me a link to this video that I can download, I'll put it up on YouTube so other people can benefit from this too.
Will do. Awesome. I really appreciate it, Jack. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, anytime. Thanks so much, Charles.
Yeah.
Nice meeting you, Cole.
Thank you,
have
Jack.
a great day.
Yeah, you too. Take care.